Right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to sow seeds direct into the ground. I don't do that too often here because particularly in the year, I have problems with slugs and snails and they eat them off before they get to a decent size, so I tend to grow them on in pots, prick them out and then plant them in here. But we're going to show you how to do it. The first things first is to prepare the soil, get it ready for sowing seeds straight into it. So they're going to be small seeds. It needs to be in a good condition, so we need to get it to a decent tilth, and that's a nice crumbly surface on the top so the seeds can push through that easily without having to get through any big bits. I've done that because I keep adding compost to it. I also need to remove the weeds. The weeds are a problem because they don't look very nice, they can harbour pests and diseases, but the biggest problem is that they compete with the other plants for sunlight, nutrients, water and space, so they need to come out, which I've done here. So when we talk about sowing seeds directly into the soil, that means you're going to sow them straight outside. You're not going to sow them inside and then prick them out and put them on. You're going to sow them straight into the soil, and there's advantages to that. One of the advantages is that it's quicker. You don't need all the process involved. You don't need all the equipment involved in sowing them inside and then pricking them out on all the pots and the space. You're just going to put them straight into the ground. And they also adapt to those environmental conditions and your soil much quicker than if you bringing them from inside outside. You need to harden them off and getting used to outside. Here they'll just get on with it straight away. The disadvantages are that you can't protect them from like environmental changes, the weather, so the rain. You can cover them if need be, but that's a bit more trouble than if you're sowing them inside. It's also more difficult to protect them from pests, and you can control the soil inside. You can get them in the right soil for the seeds to germinate. Outside here it might be a bit too wet, something like that for them, whereas you can control it inside, so that's a limitation to it. And you can also control the heat inside. So if you've got a greenhouse or you've got a heated propagator, out here you're reliant on the soil being warm enough and having good weather, to the right weather to do it and the right temperature for them to germinate properly. So the soil is the most important thing you've got really in the garden, as well as wildlife. But that's what your plants are growing in, so you need to look after it. You need to keep that soil life in there, encourage that soil life, and put as much organic material back into it as possible. Now, you could do that by digging it in, so getting a shovel, digging out, working it into the soil. What that does do, the advantages of that it does do, is it can improve the drainage, and it gets that organic material deep down into the soil. It also enables you to remove some of those perennial weeds if you've got perennial weed problems, because you can get the roots out to stop them going back. I don't do that here because I've got enough of the weeds out. I can just pick the surface weeds off and I just put the compost on top, because I find that there's a theory that if you do it too much cultivating of the soil, too much digging of it, it damages the soil life that's in there, so the worms and the bacteria and the microbes and the nematodes. It can bring all the annual weeds back up to the surface that are in there, whereas if you put in the compost on, that'll cover them and it'll kill them. And it can damage the soil structure, so all those worms that have made little holes and microbes that have made holes and opened it up, you can damage that soil structure by constantly working it all the time. So I don't do that now. I just put the compost on top of these. If I were making a new bed, then I would take out the grass and I would dig it over and cultivate it deeply. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sow some lettuce into here. I sow lettuce regularly from spring all the way through to autumn to try and keep in a constant supply of it, different types of lettuce as we go along. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and sow it in a row down here. There's a couple of ways that you can do it. You can sow what they call broadcast, which is you just sprinkle the seed all on the top, and that works well if you're doing wildflowers or big areas of things. But the problem is you need to know what the lettuce seed looks like, the seedling looks like, compared to a weed seedling, because they're all going to grow in here and you're going to have to pick out the weeds. Whereas if you grow it in a line, you know everything that comes up in a line, that's your lettuce, and everything else is not, it's a weed, and it's easier to hoe as well. You can get a hoe in between it. So you need to make a drill, what they call a drill, which is a line. You can put a string line, but I don't always do that here because the beds are so small. You can use a stick to do that and just draw out a line like that. You can use my favourite tool, the hori again, and that will draw out a nice channel, a drill. Or you can use a trowel. You can also use a hoe on a big one. If you turn the corner of a hoe, you can drag that out. So what you don't want is, you don't want too deep of a drill, because you need to think about what seeds you're sowing. If you're sowing larger seeds like peas, you're going to get a deeper drill, because generally you sow seeds twice their depth below, no deeper than that, because the seed needs to germinate and push up through the soil and then get its leaves out, and then it can start to photosynthesize and live. If it's too deep, it won't get up through the soil and it'll die before it gets there. If it's too shallow, it might blow away, or birds or mice will come along and eat it. So I've got my lettuce here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle that out onto my hand. So there we go, and I'm going to run along the drill, take a pinch, and I'm going to run along the drill, just rubbing my fingers together, my thumb and my finger together, get rid of that big clump. I'm going to try and space them out as evenly as possible. That's not easy with small seeds like this because they kind of drop in, and what you'll have to do is thin them out later. With peas and beans and things like that, or pumpkins, you can just space them out, because the big seeds, you can just drop them in and you can get the spacing right. The spacing is important because if they're too close together, they're going to act like weeds and they're going to compete with each other for water and nutrients and light. So you want to follow what it says on the seed packet. It'll tell you the distance that you're aiming for in the end, and you're going to have to pull the ones out that are in between as they germinate. So once you've done that, you've sown the seed, you can either go along it with your fingers like that and it'll fall in, the soil will fall in, or you can just gently knock the sides in like that. Any bigger bits you take out, and then you label it. You must label it with what the lettuce and what type of lettuce it is, so you know exactly what it is when it comes up, because you're probably going to sow lots of different stuff. What I'm going to do to get these to germinate and to grow well and into strong plants, I'm going to give them a water to start with, even if it's due to rain, which looks like it might do. I'm going to give them a bit of a water, not too wet, and make sure they don't dry out. Too wet and they might rot away. And then I'm going to remove any weeds that come up. I'm going to try and protect them from pests, so slugs and snails are going to be the biggest problem here, so whatever method you use to get rid of those. If it was an earlier time in the year, then what I might do is I might protect them with a cover from changes in weather. So if we've got a cold spell, put some fleece on or a cover just to keep them warm, or if there was snow about, to protect them from snow. If there were bigger plants like peas, beans, then I'd put some supports in for them, but with the lettuce I won't need to do that. And once they get bigger, I might need to feed them